You are listening to Abnormal Spaces.
I'm Donnie.
I'm Ryan.
In this podcast, we discuss conceptual realities, the researchers, authors, and explorers who describe and define them, as well as our personal experiences in these abnormal spaces. In this episode, we discuss Viktor Grebennikov and his experiments with anti-gravity and levitation using properties he identified when observing beetle wings. We've talked many times about moving of materials like levitation using sound. We've talked about cymatics. We've talked about light as a way of moving matter. And you had mentioned Viktor Grebennikov. I'd never heard of him, but when I saw the image of him and his platform, I remembered it. He was an agroecologist. That was my favorite designation that I read about him. Also entomologist, but I don't think he was formally trained in entomology. I think he just really got interested in it. But he was really interested in ecosystems and how they worked with one another. Anyway, he was analyzing scarab beetles, and when he was dissecting and taking their wings apart, he noticed that a wing kind of hovered above another wing. And so he took great interest in trying to figure out if that had something to do with their locomotion, if that had something to do with the way they fly. And he used some of the things that he discovered to create this device to levitate. He claimed that he was able to go about 1,000 miles an hour, 1,500 kilometers an hour. Also, there were eyewitness accounts of this demonstration. But because of the way it worked, I guess it interfered with camera technology, and so there wasn't a good way to document it via photographic evidence. There was just an interference. Interestingly, most of the description was that he was enveloped in like an orb of light, which I just find super fascinating in the context of some of the UAP sightings over the millennia, but even in the last decade or so. This took place back in 1988 through 1991. He died early 2000s, I think 2001 or so. One of the things that really struck me is how shapes and energy and magnetism, how all of those can work together to defy our understanding of gravity, which I'll get into in a little bit, how I think that's flawed, or at least that we just don't understand nearly as much as we think we do about gravity. But at any rate, again, we're seeing a lot of the things that we've talked about before that occur in the natural universe and the natural world, and that we don't really understand very well, but we see it. We see naturally occurring phenomena, and then we're trying to figure out how that works within our concept of how things work, just in general. So I thought it was really neat. I got into, I learned some stuff that I wasn't aware of before, like cavity resonance. I was not aware of how that actually is integrated in our daily lives more than I didn't realize it was in our cell phones. I didn't realize, all the places it's used and all the places that they try to stop it so that, they don't have this compounding. It's almost like a feedback loop effect.
Yeah.
And so, so many cool things.
Yeah, I didn't realize, until we started talking just now, I was like, oh, what are we going to talk about? And then wow, there is a lot of stuff about this that would lead to so many other things. But you were saying about him almost becoming invisible when he was apparently so high up in the air. What would he say? Like he went up about 1,000 feet
Yeah.
and around 930 kilometers per hour. Like that's like really fast.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
There was like a field around it that encapsulated him in a bubble or something.
Yeah.
And none of the elements would mess with him going at those high speeds, which sounds like a UFO sort of thing.
Yeah.
And the fact that it must have been messing with gravity or something where they couldn't see it almost. It was like transparent or translucent, like something like that.
Yeah, it was almost like, we've talked about vibrating into like a different phase or whatever. It was almost like that because he essentially disappeared in like a ball of light that just shot up into the sky and then came back down. And to see this thing, I mean, it's so funny. It just looks like a wooden platform with some handlebars and a
Looks like a scooter.
It does look like a little scooter and tons of little switches. And I remember back in, whenever that was first published, 88, 90, somewhere in there, thinking it was a hoax because I was like, oh, come on. There's two still images and like, I can do that. You give me that thing, I can replicate those photos. What's really crazy is he had written this book and he had told everyone as he was writing it, he was like, I'm going to explain all of this, etc. He filed for a patent. He was denied the patent.
Bad move.
Yeah. He was denied the patent, and the basis for the denial of the patent is really interesting to me because they said, well, we can't really prove that this works, essentially, is what the patent office said. But there are countless patents of things that don't exist, of technologies that are just theoretical, and they allow those kind of patents. So I thought that was strange, number one. Number two, he had told everyone that it was going to be about 500 pages long, and when the final book came out, it was about 300 pages long, and there are lots of pictures and drawings and a whole section of butterflies. Like one entire page is just a giant butterfly painting. And what he said about that was that the proofreaders and the publishers, and I guess some Russian scientific board or something, made him redact, remove, delete those sections that they didn't want the general public to have knowledge of or that they didn't want to answer questions about or whatever. So, we have these eyewitness accounts. We have some pretty thorough explanations from him, although not fully thorough. He always said that he just had to give hints and, give information, but he had to be careful how much information he shared. Mm-hmm. So it creates this big mystery, this mystery of what else was in there, what is he on to, what did he understand, etc. I find that really intriguing.
Yeah, I saw a guy talking about it for a little bit, and I don't know who this guy was, but it seemed like it was in the 90s, and he was speaking in front of an audience, and he had slides and all the whole deal. But he must have been some kind of scientist or physicist or something. And but he was talking about it, and he was really going into it in detail, although he was talking really fast. And I was like, and there was a lot of big terms and things, but
yeah.
But he said that the platform was hollow underneath, and it almost looked like 4 clamshells in the corner or fans, like
yeah,
right?
Yep.
You saw that?
Yep.
And the controls put these fans in different positions as to move him forward or backward or up, or faster. How would you ever even come to that conclusion?
Right.
Because I've seen videos of people that get these scarab beetle wings, and they do float.
One of the arguments is, well, that's static electricity.
Yeah.
And maybe it is. Maybe it is.
Yeah.
That we don't know. But I don't think that scarab beetles use solely static electricity to move from one place to the other. So I feel like there's more to it than just that.
Yeah. So they have 2 sets of wings, and then so they open that first protective layer, shell, mm-hmm. and then they flap their real wings.
Right.
And I'm wondering if that buzzing and the cavity resonance of the top wing in between those, that's what causes their lift and range of...
Yes.
Yeah.
The view of the wing under the microscope shows these interesting shapes. They're like cones inside of hexagonal structure, which we see cones and we see hexagonal structure throughout nature, hexagonal a lot. I'm wondering if the vibration creates a certain frequency and then the outer shell is almost like an amplification of that or something, like it's bouncing against that, creating more, and then that creates the lift or whatever necessary.
Yeah, and that's one set of wings for one small beetle.
Right.
But if you think about mini beetle wings,
Yeah.
I've heard that he used real wings, and I've also heard that he synthetically reproduced them.
What I read was the Titan beetle was the actual beetle wings that he used because it was bigger.
Yeah.
And so it was just easier to manipulate, to check out. And as soon as he discovered the phenomena, he wanted to go bigger because he was already thinking about the applications of moving people, moving objects, etc. I can't remember which the first beetle was, but the Titan beetle wings were the ones that he messed with the most that were natural. But yeah, then he also had some fabricated synthetic wings.
I remember it. Yeah, because the guy said that he wouldn't give up the type of beetle because it was endangered. And I guess that Titan beetle, yeah.
Yep. We think about the levitation of large objects, and, one of the first things that comes to a lot of people's mind would be the pyramids of Giza. And I think about all the scarab beetle iconography throughout that region and throughout that time. And I wonder too, we've talked about megafauna before, and I wonder if maybe there were bigger beetles at the time. We don't know. And I don't mean like, 1950s sci-fi giant bugs. I mean more like, instead of being the size of a quarter, it's the size of a hamburger or something.
Yeah.
Could be.
Football.
Yeah. Often those beetles are depicted with the outer shell wings open and then the other wings protruding underneath. And, I have to wonder if they knew something about how those wing structures and the frequency at which they vibrated, if that had something to do with levitation and moving large objects, or, going long distances with little energy or what, or all of those things.
Yeah, same with bees. I mean, bees are fascinating to me like that too. I've heard the frequency is what gives them their lift.
Yeah, and it's what creates the static electricity so that the pollen will stick to their legs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And something about the frequency creates the hexagonal structure in the honeycomb.
Yeah.
It's so wild. If you look at nature for anything, it's almost like it has the answer.
Yeah.
You have to be crazy enough, not crazy, but like obsessed enough to just follow it to the end that you can get to.
Yeah.
Whatever that is,
Yeah. Yeah, well, and that's the thing that makes the gravity part of it so frustrating is we don't have a good understanding of gravity. And every time we think we have a good understanding of gravity, then we realize that we don't. And a lot of physicists and other scientists, they're pretty divided on what gravity even is or how it even gets here. And there's now this understanding of gravity waves where you may have a higher gravity day. And what is that? And where does that come from? And so, a lot of times when we think about anti-gravity or defying gravity, it's just some clumsy nomenclature. It's just, some wording that doesn't really get to what it is because we don't really know what it is.
Yeah, there was, scrolling through a bunch of videos and going down this little rabbit hole. There was this video that popped up, and I'll send it to you. It looked like it was shot in the 80s, and it was about this random guy from Scotland. He was apparently a genius, and he got so obsessed with gyroscopes. His wife, they're like interviewing his wife and stuff, and she's just like, "Yeah, this is fucked, man. Like this dude is it's been, 10 years, and this guy just goes to work. He gets up at 6 o'clock, rides the train into work, comes back at like 8 o'clock, has his tea, goes out to his garage, and messes with this thing, brings his papers into bed, drawing. Like he's just so obsessed with it, But he can machine his own tools. So he can machine his ideas into this thing that he created. It was a gyroscope, and I'm not going to go into it, but it was crazy. And so after so many years and so many mistakes and everything, he actually got with a professor, expert of gyroscopes, and I can't remember his name. They finally got together, and he actually went to the university with his little thing, and they measured it, and they're like, this is crazy. Like, this is crazy. It does require power, I think, to spin initially, but then it just goes. And it lifts.
Oh.
It's just based on the wheels. There's like 3 wheels and a central wheel or something, and they change degree at some point when it starts to lift, and it's the wildest thing.
Yeah.
Like, he was talking about the implications of it, like what can it be used for? We can put it in rockets in space. We can put it in submarines. We can put it in water, watercraft and things like that. And in space, it would also make artificial gravity. So there wouldn't be weightlessness inside of aircraft or spacecraft.
Interesting.
Yeah. Just wild, man. Like, just random popped up, and I started watching it, and I was like, wow, this is wild.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, speaking of the spinning, because it was only maybe 4 or 5 years ago, there was a researcher who demonstrated that if you spin a magnet at a certain speed, then you can make something levitate. Essentially, he just put this little magnet on the end of a Dremel. He noted the pole orientation, and then he put another magnet, and it was actually 2 repellent, so it was north to north, so it would normally repel. He turns it on, and it causes the other one to also spin in the same direction, but there's a space in between it because that's the repellent force of the 2 magnets. And then he just moves the Dremel all around, and, while it's spinning, and the other magnet just floated above it. Every direction he went, it just kept moving. And then so they've replicated this with a bunch of different things. So again, not only do we not know what gravity really is, but we also don't fully understand how magnets work. Yeah. And, the Earth is spinning and has a magnetosphere, but also has a lot of magnetism just within the crust. I always wonder if the core spinning at a different speed generates some of that magnetic energy, electromagnetic energy, I guess, at that point. But regardless, that makes sense what you're saying about the gyroscope creating a gravity field within the ball or spacecraft or whatever it's in, because again, it goes back to the spinning, which goes back to the torsion. We just have so little of a grasp on the force of gravity, and we call it a force because we fully do not understand it.
I think that there's a lot of things that are about to really come out as far as information and things, and I don't it's going to be interesting in the coming years, I think, what we get to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another neat thing on the Grebennikov platform device, levitation device, is there were two LEDs. One was white and one was red. He was also experimenting with how light could influence the direction of the energy flow. White was used for propulsion and red was used for a slowing down. And these weren't very big LEDs. You think about the waves of light energy.
Yeah.
Again, that's particle theory and that's wave theory. And he was like, I don't know what it is about these wings or their structure, but I'm going to replicate it in a way. And I don't know what it is exactly about the light, but I'm going to add that to it and see, what that does. And it reminds me of like all of the theories that had existed, but there was no way to test them until later. So like the Higgs boson, that was conceptualized in the 40s and 50s, but they never thought there would be a Large Hadron Collider. So they were like, well, we can probably never test for this, but we have reason to believe it exists based on all of our computations. And then 40 years later, they build this thing and they are able to detect it. It's the same thing. I mean, Grebennikov could have really stumbled onto something, even if it was somewhat accidentally. He could have really stumbled onto something, discovered something, but because we don't understand gravity or magnetism, we barely understand static electricity, because we don't have a good grasp on those things, this just looks like some nonsense. And I'm like, is it though? Like, I can't really tell. I believe the cavity resonance, we know that's a real thing, and we can see the structure within those wings. So we know there are cavities for some reason or another. They have a very specific shape, which we have seen replicated throughout history and art and everything else. Is it just that we don't know the question to ask and we don't know how to test for it? Is that the only reason that this guy's levitation device is quackified, as considered controversial or considered pseudoscience? Is that it? Is it just because we don't know?
Yeah, it is. I mean, what reputable scientist is going to even give the time of day to any of that?
Right.
I've said before that pseudoscience and all of that stuff, the quack stuff, I'm like, follow that.
A lot of times, yeah. Well, think about this. Who's funding the research?
Right.
No one's going to fund that.
Right.
Free energy for everybody?
Right.
Ability to levitate? No.
Just wait, man. I swear, my gut just knows it. It's coming. And we can't even imagine it. That's how crazy it is.
Will we believe it, though?
Yeah, we believe it, but we can't imagine actually living in it. I can't.
Yeah.
Like there's just a device that just sits there and your house is powered.
Right. Yeah.
Like without limit.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. I think about crystals and whatnot and how, there's a good chance that there is some way to harness the power of a crystal and power your whole home with no exhaust, no pollution, no anything, just some device to tap into that energy of that crystal.
Yeah. Why don't we have the force field generated that we can sit in a chair and it makes a bubble around us and we can teleport to wherever the fuck we want to go?
Right.
Like, that sounds crazy, but a lot of stuff sounded crazy 100 years ago.
Right.
It's a repeating thing.
Yeah.
And the things keep getting more and more like fantastical. I feel like we keep getting not dumber, but our attention span keeps getting less and less because of the technology, and the distraction is more and more.
Right.
So I feel like, in the 1800s, they had way less distraction.
Right.
So they could delve deeply into these questions and take them to the point where, you're just like, wow, you dedicated your whole life to this one thing.
Yeah.
Like Likovsky.
Yeah.
And that's why it works.
Right.
Because he was a genius in the way that he could that he put himself in a state where he could start to look at these natural phenomena, and then he learned how to, make it into a thing that he could use.
Yeah.
That's all that's going on, man. And you don't think that they've been doing that since then up until now,
Right.
secretly? Like,
yeah.
I don't buy that.
Yeah, just because they haven't published all their findings doesn't mean they haven't found stuff.
I know. It reminds me of, like on Indiana Jones, that big warehouse where
Yeah.
they just wheel all the...
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think of that all the time. I also, there is a healthy amount of skepticism. Lack of evidence isn't proof of something, So when we say, well, they've probably discovered something and they haven't published it or whatever, by virtue of them not publishing it doesn't mean that it exists. So that, I think that's the place where you have to be a little more skeptical and you have to remind yourself, well, hey, this doesn't prove anything, However, human nature is such that it's nearly impossible for me to imagine a scenario where the study of this just tapered off and they went to study something else. I don't buy that at all.
No. I mean, think of the military, think of things above the military that we don't know about, like black ops and all this crazy shit. I mean, come on, man.
Right.
I'm not saying that I know, because I don't know. I agree with you 100%. Just because it's not published doesn't mean it's real. But, I mean, there's a certain disconnect between the public and how it runs, and how easy it is to brainwash us and keep us doing our thing.
Yeah. Well, and it's so we're so easily distracted.
Yeah.
And, to your point earlier, the further you go back, I feel like the less distractions there were. And that's when some of the greatest concepts that we still employ today were developed. And it was simply because they had enough time in the day and they were able to quiet their minds enough that they were able to, really fixate on things.
And it was before a time where the FDA came around, before the profit was a thing.
Yeah.
And also we didn't have the technology to they weren't on computers. Nobody knew where anybody was. You could live in a hole somewhere and nobody would ever know.
Yeah.
But now it's I don't know if you can do that hardly.
I don't think you can.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, especially not if you've ever been a part of the system. Like if you're some indigenous tribe in the middle of the Amazon, then yes, probably. Although I'm sure there's enough flyovers and satellite imagery that they have a pretty good idea of what the tribes are doing. But regardless, for someone born in the United States in the last 100 years, no.
But how are you going to get your equipment and technology and electricity and everything you need out there to do whatever experiments you're doing? I mean, without being known.
Right. Yes, that's impossible.
Yeah.
I really thought Grebennikov's artwork was really fantastic. Yeah. This guy had a very keen eye, and he was very interested in nature, specifically in the interplay of nature, so how insects affected plants and agriculture and how the systems all work together. So it doesn't surprise me that someone with a curious mind and someone who has already established patterns that hadn't been really established well before, it does not surprise me one bit that he then discovers these structures within these wings and then fixates on that for a period. I think it takes a mind like that, and it takes someone who is constantly evaluating all of the pieces of the puzzles. And that's the thing. One person dedicating their entire lives to all of these pieces of all these puzzles still isn't going to get all of the puzzles completed. It's not really possible,
Yeah.
at least with our current capacity to understand things.
Even the biggest geniuses that have been out there, like Tesla. Think about Tesla. We wouldn't have anything without that dude.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe somebody else would have come along and, figured it out, I'm sure, at some point. But I don't know. Like, I don't know about someone figuring it out like he did.
Right. Just understanding it. I feel like he had an understanding. It's not even, it's one thing to figure stuff out. It's one thing to like have some theories and some concepts, but I feel like he knew.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of how things. I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. There's we listened to a podcast. It was about non-speaking autistic kids and telepathy. This doctor, and I can't remember her name, of course, but just really quickly, she has been doing all these experiments with these kids, and they've figured out, how to, with computer programs and with point boards with words and stuff, that they can communicate, because the doctors were telling the mothers, and they still do, they're like, there's nobody in there. I mean, just give up. And I don't know why they do that.
That's awful.
Me and Saban are just like in the car, and we're like, why would you be a medical professional and you would just be like, nope, just give up, just stop trying, stop beating yourself up, or whatever,
Yeah.
And eventually, like this kid had a moment of, I don't know, clarity or whatever, and he just went to his mom, and he's like, this kid never spoke, never, nothing. And he was like, he put his arm around his mom, and she was like crying or something, and he's like, I love you, Mom. He said it. He said the words. She was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
All of the doctors, we've been to, they said, no, that's not a thing.
Wow.
He's not in there. There's nobody. So then she went way down the rabbit hole and started figuring out all kinds of crazy shit like what we talk about.
Yeah.
So they get him communicating. He can't talk, but he can point to words on this board that they've taught him how to use it. And also this computer program will speak the words that he types. And sometimes he can point at words or whatever. So now they just communicate. So let me back up. The podcaster, her mind is blown by this, obviously. And so she goes to these houses of these different people and working with this doctor. And they have come to the conclusion, based on all of these different kids and all of this information, that it's not even telepathy. It's just a frequency that they all tune into. There's one that lives in Texas, one lives in Georgia, and they're best friends.
Huh.
And they've never met each other
Wow.
physically,
Yeah.
but they have this thing that they call the talk on the hill.
Okay.
Yeah. And the talk on the hill is basically the frequency that they all tune into to just hang out like they would wherever.
Oh, wow.
Right. So that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily telepathy. That's like instantaneous.
Yeah.
And so the kids can read the minds of their mothers completely, because I guess the mothers are, their mother,
Yeah.
They've spent the most time with them probably and everything. So, but they can also read the minds of anyone.
Oh, wow.
And from other rooms. They'll be down looking at, like, playing some kind of game or like, drawing or something, and somebody will hold up a card in another room or draw a picture or have a random number generator, whatever it is. And they just always give the answer, like 100%.
Wow.
Always. And then they ask how they do it, and they're like, it's just there.
Yeah.
And so then they pulled out a freaking calculator in a different room, and they're like, and she's like, just types in a bunch of numbers times a bunch of numbers and answer over and over and over and over. It's always the right answer.
Huh.
There's no computation going on. There's no figuring out. It's just there.
Right.
So it's the frequency.
Yeah.
You know, it ties in a lot with this because it's just like, I mean, if that's a thing, and I think that's a thing for all humans.
Yeah.
I just think that something about maybe autism, especially a non-speaking autism, maybe like with what that diagnosis is, comes some sort of loosening of a part of the mind or the brain or something that has no curtain.
Yeah.
And it's just instantaneous, you know?
Yeah. There's been talk for a long time about some great reset. And, you know, we can debate whether or not that is absolutely necessary. And we can debate who is doing the reset and who benefits and who loses. But suffice to say, the system certainly appears to be unsustainable as it is currently. So it's a matter of, does the Band-Aid get ripped and then, you know, there's chaos for a while and then it heals? How do we get through this change period, number one? And then number two, how often does the change happen? I say every second of every moment there are all these micro changes that are affecting the large change. So we feel this thing coming, but we don't know when it's going to get here. We don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know what's going to happen afterwards. All we know is we have all of these little micro changes happening, most of which we're unaware of, even within ourselves, that's all leading to whatever this reset situation is.
Yeah, man, that's like a perfect explanation, I think, because think about just like the year 2000 or 1990. Think about how different it was. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't mean like just technologically, but just the way everything was thought about. It was so different. It felt really solid. Like everything was like, I'm here, I'm doing this. This is what I do. This is a rock. This is the ground. This is, you know, whatever. And now it's almost like there's no solidity. We've never seen anything like anything what we're looking at right now. It is the craziest shit ever.
Yeah. No one that's alive today has witnessed anything like this. And you, even going through history, it's hard to find an analog. It's hard to find something that relates closely to this. I mean, certain little things, yes, you can point back and say, oh, well, this is the way it was back then too. But the overall vibe shift, and I hate to say it that way, but really, like, I know exactly what you mean. I, for the longest time, labored under the delusion that the institutions and the foundations that this country were built upon, they were very solid. And yes, there were challenges, and yes, sometimes there were slow incremental changes. For the most part, everything was solid. And what we've seen for the last 8 to 10 years is the complete erosion of any of those underlying fundamentals, any of those underlying foundations. It is all quicksand now.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like.
For real, man. And it just keeps going down and down and down. And I don't know, man. There has to be a breaking point. There has to be.
Well, I mean, we believe that.
Well, we call it a reset. I'd have no idea what it looks like. All I'm saying is if you just look right now, and I don't look too much because I don't like to get caught up in all the bullshit, but from what I see, it is the most insane that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And I'm 47, but like, imagine somebody who's 70.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine what they've seen. Like,
right.
They're probably just like, oh my God, like are we just going to disappear now? Or
yeah.
Best case scenario, information and technology comes out that changes the way of human life. Antimatter, anti-gravity, free energy. We call it free energy. I don't know, whatever. And then that would lay the foundation for a more peaceful, I think, integration into all this new shit that's going to come to light, man. But
yeah,
there's that. But if there isn't that, then I see a darker possibility.
Yeah. Well, one of the weird things about the way humans conceptualize things is, by default, if we don't have information, we just fill the gap with whatever.
Yeah.
When you couple that with a robust and hypersensitive threat detection system, and with a robust and often accurate but not always accurate pattern recognition system, then you create this situation where you're just making up everything about everything. And like, I think that's why as we age, like you and I in particular, why we believe less in the solidity of anything, why the answers are just only partial answers. There are no complete answers. The question is where we live. And I think a big part of that is kind of a recognizing of the way we try to make sense of the world and how inherently flawed that system is, and how we almost have to reject how that system works in order to actually get to some kind of truth.
A much broader view of matter and the way that nature is organized. And this is broadened through the concept of fields, first introduced into science by Michael Faraday in relation to electric and magnetic fields, then through Einstein's can see me here, but all of you are supposed to be inside my head, as lots of faces and the whole of this room is meant to be. And inside your head is supposed to be a little Rupert, somewhere inside your brain. That's not what we actually experience. What we actually experience is that our images are out there. Your image of me, I'm imagining, is where I'm actually standing right now. My image of you is where you are. And using fMRI that matches